Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Rita Skeeter is a character who didn't get much screen or book time, yet every single one of her appearances in the Harry Potter story turns into a full-blown scandal. Readers and viewers dislike her for her audacity, fact-twisting and obsession with sensation. But perhaps you didn't know some curious details connected with this sharp-tongued journalist. Let's take a closer look. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Blackmail from Hermione. One of the most striking episodes in Skeeter's story was her encounter with Hermione Granger. At a time when the Ministry of Magic refused to acknowledge Voldemort's return and the Daily Prophet painted Harry as a liar, it was Hermione who forced the journalist to publish the truth. Skeeter was trapped. Granger had uncovered her secret, an unregistered beetle animagus. This was a violation of the law, and without any polite requests, Hermione simply ordered Rita to write an honest interview for the Quibbler. And Skeeter complied. Number 2. She was banned from Hogwarts. During the Triwizard Tournament, Rita was granted a rare permission to enter Hogwarts for interviews. But instead of objective reports, she engaged in gossip and attacks against Harry. Dumbledore refused to tolerate this and banned her from the castle. However, Skeeter found a loophole. She stalked students and even interviewed Hagrid outside the grounds. Number 3. Slanderous biographies of Harry and Snape. After the Battle of Hogwarts, Skeeter wasted no time. Rowling later mentioned that the journalist immediately set out to write a Harry Potter biography. A quarter of the book turned out to be true, while the rest was pure invention. Her pen didn't spare Severus Snape either, yet another biography only distorted the professor's role in the fate of the wizarding world even further. Number 4. Could have been friends with Bellatrix Lestrange. There's one detail that raises some interesting thoughts. Rita Skeeter and Bellatrix Lestrange were born in the same year, 1951, and this means their paths at Hogwarts could have crossed. Considering Skeeter's obvious ties to Slytherin, remember her collaboration with Pansy and Draco, it's entirely possible that the young journalist moved in the same circles as Bellatrix, or at least knew her personally. Number 5. International Confederation of Wizards. Let's not forget that Rita sometimes covered events far bigger than school intrigues. One of her articles was about the International Confederation of Wizards, the wizarding world's version of the UN. Interestingly, even Dumbledore admitted that he particularly enjoyed her description of the 1994 conference, a rare case where Skeeter actually received approval from such a respected wizard. Number 6. Stirring conflict at the Quidditch World Cup. Skeeter never limited herself to Britain's internal affairs. In 2014, during the Quidditch World Cup, she took a single remark from the Brazilian manager, aimed at the Welsh team, and blew it up into an international scandal. In the end, the quarrel escalated into a direct shouting match between the managers right on the field, in front of the audience. Rita's ability to turn small words into big drama proved once again. Her manipulative talent went far beyond the pages of a newspaper. Number 7. The etymology of her name. And finally, a small yet symbolic detail. The surname Skeeter sounds like the colloquial word for mosquito. Fittingly, irritating, biting, and ever-present, Rita lives up to her name perfectly. And her secret ability to transform into a beetle makes this connection all the more obvious. Number 8. Inspired by real journalists. J.K. Rowling admitted that Rita Skeeter was not born from fantasy alone. She was inspired by real reporters who had frustrated Rowling in the early days of Harry Potter's success. Some journalists twisted her words, taking harmless comments and shaping them into controversy. Rita became the magical mirror of that world, a journalist who cared less about truth and more about spectacle. Rowling once said that she wanted Skeeter to embody the worst excesses of the tabloid press. The way Skeeter worked in The Goblet of Fire was a direct parody of such tactics. She asked Harry if she could use her quill, pretending It was harmless. The quill immediately began writing, "Harry Potter's eyes are swimming with tears as he speaks of his tragic past." Harry hadn't shed a tear. He hadn't even said anything dramatic. But like the journalists Rowling remembered, Skeeter didn't need facts. She needed drama. This connection makes Skeeter's presence feel sharper, almost uncomfortably real. When she published her book, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, readers in the wizarding world reacted much like Rowling's fans did to unfair press, angry, confused, yet unable to look away. The character became a warning. Words can wound, and those who wield them without care can shape entire legacies. Rita Skeeter was Rowling's satire, but also her revenge. Number 9, her secret weapon against politicians. Rita Skeeter's greatest weapon was not her quill, it was her animagus form. As a beetle, she slipped unnoticed into offices, corridors, and even private meetings. No door was too secure, no conversation too private. During the Triwizard Tournament, she used this advantage ruthlessly. Ludo Bagman, already under suspicion for his gambling, became one of her easiest targets. She overheard him discussing debts and shady wagers, and soon her articles hinted at a ministry official entangled in scandal. Bagman's reputation crumbled quickly. Rita never revealed her source, of course. Instead, she presented her scoops as if they had come from trusted insiders. Readers of the Daily Prophet began to see him not as a charming ex-Quidditch star, but as a reckless man drowning in poor decisions. Even Harry noticed the shift, remarking in The Goblet of Fire how Bagman suddenly seemed more nervous and less respected. The scandal was not entirely Rita's creation, but she fanned it until it blazed out of control. Her tactics worked because no one suspected the truth. No one imagined that a tiny beetle had crawled onto a window ledge to eavesdrop on a whispered deal. Hermione was the first to put the pieces together, telling Harry and Ron, "She's been listening in places she shouldn't be able to. She's an unregistered animagus." That revelation explained everything, how Rita always seemed one step ahead, how she knew things even ministry officials tried to hide. For Skeeter, politicians were the perfect prey. They had secrets, and she had wings. Each scandal she exposed was part truth, part invention, but it was enough to weaken trust in the ministry. In the 1990s, when fear of Voldemort's return was spreading, her stories about officials like Bagman added to the chaos. Rita Skeeter didn't just report on politics, she helped shape it, one whispered conversation at a time. Number 10, ongoing feud with Hermione. Rita Skeeter never forgave Hermione Granger. Their clash during the Triwizard Tournament had left scars on both sides. Hermione had exposed her as an unregistered animagus, trapped her in a jar, and forced her to write the truth about Voldemort's return. Rita never forgot the humiliation. Years later, when Hermione rose to power and eventually became Minister for Magic, Skeeter saw her chance for revenge. She began with subtle attacks, short columns sharp as knives questioning Hermione's competence. "Too young, too reckless, too close to Harry Potter," one article sneered, echoing the whispers of Skeeter's unnamed sources. The words carried the same poison as when she once claimed Hermione toyed with both Victor Krum and Harry in the Daily Prophet. It was the old Skeeter style, half fact, half venom, all scandal. But this time, things were different. Hermione was no longer a schoolgirl trapped by gossip. She was the most powerful witch in the ministry. When Skeeter's articles grew more vicious, the Prophet's editors faced a choice: risk lawsuits for libel or silence her. For the first time, Skeeter's words came back to strike her. Several of her columns were pulled before publication. The Prophet itself admitted privately that Minister Granger's patience should not be tested. Still, Rita refused to stop. She saw herself as the voice of defiance, the one willing to challenge authority. But Hermione had already beaten her once, and now she had the power to protect her reputation. It was a battle of quills and laws, and though Rita tried to twist the story, the public could see the truth. The feud that began in Hogwarts halls had never ended, it had only grown louder. Number 11, Master of Image Manipulation. Rita Skeeter's greatest skill was never writing. It was reshaping reputations. She could take a hero and make him look like a villain with a few strokes of her quill. Her book, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, became the perfect example. To the wizarding world, Dumbledore had been a wise leader, the man who stood against Grindelwald and Voldemort. Rita presented him instead as a manipulator, a man who sought power for himself under the guise of serving others. Readers were stunned. She did not invent everything. That was her trick. She used fragments of truth and stretched them until the meaning snapped. The friendship between Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald was undeniable. Skeeter framed it as a dangerous obsession, quoting from exclusive sources that painted Dumbledore as reckless. He dreamed of dominance, not peace, her book declared. For many who worshipped him, those words cut deep. Even the story of his sister Ariana was turned into scandal. Skeeter implied that Dumbledore bore responsibility for her death, that he had chosen ambition over family. Harry, reading those pages in the Deathly Hallows, felt a wave of doubt. Did he ever, care about us at all? The power of Skeeter's writing was not in accuracy but in suggestion. She planted seeds of mistrust and let the reader's imagination do the rest. And that was why her work lingered. People could not dismiss it outright because each chapter contained just enough fact to make the lies believable. She did not destroy Dumbledore's legacy, but she cracked it. She made the wizarding world ask questions it had never dared to ask before. And for Rita Skeeter, that was victory. Number 12, her best friend, the quick quotes, quill. Rita Skeeter's closest companion was not a colleague or a friend. It was her enchanted quick quotes quill. Bright green and sharply pointed, it scratched across the parchment with a life of its own. Rita only needed to feed it the bare bones of a story, and the quill did the rest. Facts became stretched, tones became sharper, and ordinary sentences bloomed into sensational scandals. It was less a tool and more a partner in crime. We see its work most clearly during the Goblet of Fire, when Rita interviews Harry. Harry answers her questions with short, awkward replies, but the quill spins them into melodrama. Tears fill those startlingly green eyes, it writes, as Harry stares in disbelief. He never cried. He never even raised his voice. But the quill did not care. It wanted a story, and the truth was only the starting point. The same thing happens with Hagrid. She listens politely to his words, yet the quill twists them into a grotesque portrait of a dangerous half-giant. Hagrid's gentle laugh becomes a booming roar, and his passion for magical creatures turns into a threat. Readers who had never met him were left horrified. In that moment, it was not Rita's voice that shaped public opinion, but the quill's exaggerations. And yet Rita never stopped it. She loved it. She relied on it. The quick quotes. Quill was everything she wanted to be, clever, sharp, and ruthless. It amplified her talent for scandal to the point where she no longer needed to think carefully about her words. The quill did the dirty work. All she had to do was smile, ask a question, and let her friend write the rest. Number 13, she never changes. Rita Skeeter never changed. Wars came and went. Voldemort rose and fell. Ministers of magic replaced each other in endless succession, but Rita's quill never shifted its purpose. It was never about truth. It was about drama. It was about a headline that could make readers gasp. In her eyes, the public did not want honesty. They wanted scandal, and she gave it to them without shame. Even in 2014, decades after Harry Potter had defeated Voldemort, Skeeter's pen dripped with poison. At the Quidditch World Cup, she published articles that stirred unnecessary tension. She quoted Victor Krum out of context, painting him as arrogant and bitter. She described Ginny Weasley, who was reporting for the Daily Prophet, with her usual sting. overly sentimental and clearly far too close to her sources. Skeeter thrived on conflict, and wherever there was none, she created it. Her old habits were so predictable that Hermione once remarked, "Rita Skeeter will always find a way to twist the truth." And she did. The players on the field became less interesting than the arguments between team managers that Rita gleefully highlighted. She transformed casual remarks into feuds. She turned sports into politics. For her, the match was never about quaffles or bludgers. It was about who hated whom the most. Time had not softened her. If anything, it sharpened her hunger for sensation. Readers still rushed to buy her columns, even though they knew half of it was lies. That was her magic. Rita Skeeter could make the wizarding world stop and whisper, not because of what was real, but because of what she chose to print. And in that sense, she was eternal. Number 14. Problems with the Ministry of Magic. After Hermione exposed Rita Skeeter's illegal secret in the Goblet of Fire, the Ministry of Magic suddenly had a problem it could not ignore. An unregistered animagus was a serious crime, and Skeeter's ability to transform into a beetle had allowed her to spy on students, professors, and even private conversations inside Hogwarts. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement threatened her with an official investigation, and the penalty could have included fines or even imprisonment. For a moment it seemed Rita's career was finished. But Skeeter had built her reputation on wriggling out of impossible corners. She met with investigators, pretended to be cooperative, and even gave vague answers about her activities. In truth, she was never punished. Ministry officials had no concrete evidence, only rumors and Hermione's word, and Skeeter understood how to manipulate that weakness. In her sharp, cutting voice, she reminded them of her loyal service to wizarding journalism, twisting the conversation away from the real crime. What makes this episode so striking is that Hermione herself admitted Rita was nearly untouchable. "The Prophet won't touch her while Fudge is in power," she told Harry and Ron, frustrated that Skeeter's lies continued to spread unchecked. Cornelius Fudge, anxious about his own image, had no interest in silencing a journalist who could be useful in swaying public opinion. Rita understood this perfectly. She knew her pen was more powerful than any fine the ministry could impose. And so she returned to her old ways. Quietly, carefully. As a beetle, she slipped into private rooms and gathered whispers for her next scandalous piece. To the public eye, she was just a bold writer with sharp words, but to those who had seen her exposed like Hermione, she was something far more dangerous, a woman who had faced the threat of the law and simply brushed it aside as though rules had never applied to her in the first place. Number 15. Rita and the Muggles. Rita Skeeter remains one of the most fascinating characters in the Harry Potter universe, not because of her honesty or integrity, but because of the peculiar way she blurred the line between journalism and spectacle. Readers remember her sharp quill scratching out headlines like Harry Potter's Secret Heartache or her unflattering biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. Yet there is a curious silence in her body of work. Rita never once wrote about Muggles. In a world where scandal was her bread and butter, the absence of Muggle-related exposés almost feels like a hole deliberately carved into her career. The question is not whether she avoided the topic by accident, but why she so carefully circled around it. It is important to recall that the Daily Prophet, the publication where Skeeter thrived, was not just any newspaper. It was the official voice of Wizarding Britain. Its editors, bound by centuries of tradition and quiet ministry oversight, ensured that Wizarding society never looked too deeply into the affairs of Muggles. Wizards might live among them, but they were encouraged to keep their world completely separate. For a sensationalist like Skeeter, this boundary must have felt suffocating. She could shred the reputation of Hermione Granger with insinuations about her love life, yet she could never touch the story of a famous Muggle politician who might have crossed paths with magic. Her talent for exaggeration and invention was restrained not by her imagination, but by the rules of what could be printed. The few hints that slipped through the cracks suggest that Rita was not entirely obedient. In whispered accounts from her colleagues at the Prophet, she was said to have kept private notebooks, filled not with polished stories, but with raw sketches of ideas. These were never meant for the public eye, perhaps never even for submission. One clerk, years later, claimed that among those notes were fragments linking famous Muggle figures to unexplained magical events. Such rumours gained traction when Skeeter's office was raided by ministry officials during the aftermath of the Second Wizarding War. Ostensibly, the raid was about her use of illegal animagus abilities. But archivists who catalogued the confiscated material noted the presence of sensitive drafts. No explanation was ever provided. The irony is that Rita Skeeter lived in a period when Muggle culture had more than enough material for her brand of scandal. The late 20th century was full of Muggle celebrities, politicians and royals whose lives contained drama that could rival any wizarding duel. Rita, had she been permitted, might have drawn links between them and the wizarding world. Consider the case of Princess Diana, whose sudden and tragic death in 1997 stirred conspiracy theories even in the non-magical world. To a quill like Skeeter's, the suggestion that magical interference might have played a role would have been irresistible. Imagine the headline, "Candle in the Wind?" or "Curse in the Shadows, Skeeter reveals the wizard behind the tragedy." It is no wonder the ministry preferred to keep her hands tied. In fact, the very mechanics of her writing styles lent themselves to cross-world speculation. Skeeter was not a reporter who searched for facts. She created narratives, weaving half-truths into something so dramatic that the public could not look away. We see this clearly when she reported on Harry during the Triwizard Tournament. "Harry Potter's secret heartache," she wrote, portraying him as a brooding, attention-seeking boy, despite evidence to the contrary. If she could twist the life of a schoolboy into a melodrama, what might she have done with figures like Bill Clinton or Madonna, names that filled Muggle headlines during her peak years? Her pen could have recast global history as a hidden stage for magical players. There is one particularly persistent rumour about Skeeter's drafts that continues to intrigue wizarding historians. Supposedly, she wrote a fragment linking Michael Jackson to wizardkind. Jackson's extraordinary performances, his otherworldly dance moves, and his almost enchanted presence on stage were, in Skeeter's imagination, signs of a magical heritage. A half-finished draft allegedly suggested that Jackson's glittering costumes were modelled after robes charmed to shine under candlelight, and that his ability to capture audiences resembled a siren-like enchantment. Whether Skeeter believed this or simply crafted it as scandalous entertainment is unknown, but the ministry reportedly marked the note with a red seal, labelling it classified. Why would the ministry care about such harmless scribblings? The answer lies in the delicate relationship between the magical and non-magical worlds. Wizards were under strict secrecy laws, not merely for tradition, but for survival. An article that even hinted at Muggle celebrities being tied to the magical world could have sparked chaos. Imagine the frenzy if Muggles began demanding explanations for every unusual event in their history. Skeeter's drafts might have seemed absurd, but absurdity has power when it feeds public imagination. The wizarding authorities knew that, and they kept a tight rein on her words. And yet there is a sense of loss in what never was. Skeeter, for all her dishonesty, had an uncanny instinct for where curiosity lived. She saw the cracks in reputations, the hidden scars behind polished appearances. This instinct, if turned toward the Muggle world, might have created a fascinating, if dangerous, bridge between societies. Readers who consumed her column for amusement might have found themselves questioning the very fabric of secrecy. Perhaps this is why Hermione Granger, who once trapped Skeeter in a jar as an unregistered beetle animagus, treated her with such caution. Hermione understood that Skeeter's true weapon was not her beetle form or even her pen, but her ability to plant ideas that could not easily be erased. Number 16. Questionable sources. Of all the figures who walked the margins of the wizarding world, few embodied the dangerous allure of half-truths and gossip as perfectly as Rita Skeeter. Her presence in the story of Harry Potter was never just about parchment and quill. It was about the way she bent reality to suit her own agenda, a skill that left countless witches and wizards questioning whether what they read was truth, exaggeration, or outright fabrication. Rita was not a seeker of truth but a merchant of suspicion, and her methods revealed just how thin the line could be between journalism and manipulation. When she wrote her infamous coverage of the Triwizard Tournament in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Skeeter immediately proved that accuracy was less important to her than sensationalism. She took fragments of overheard conversations and laced them with innuendo until the resulting article felt more like a scandalous confession than a report. Her so-called interviews with Harry and Hermione were prime examples. In the book she wrote, Harry Potter's disturbing behavior has been causing concern among his classmates at Hogwarts. This assertion had no basis in truth, but Rita had spoken to Slytherins like Pansy Parkinson, who were all too happy to provide her with malicious anecdotes. To Skeeter, Parkinson's venom was not bias, but valuable source material. Pansy herself played a crucial role in shaping the venomous tone of Skeeter's stories. Known for her devotion to Draco Malfoy and her disdain for Harry and his friends, she provided a steady stream of sneers and cutting remarks that Skeeter could easily twist into evidence. When Skeeter suggested that Hermione was using both Harry and Victor Krum to advance her own fame, the fingerprints of Pansy were visible everywhere. The insult had first surfaced as a cruel joke in the Slytherin common room, yet in Skeeter's hands it became a public accusation. Suddenly Hermione was branded the Scarlet Woman in the Daily Prophet, her reputation dragged through the mud with nothing more than schoolyard spite serving as evidence. It was not only students who found themselves seduced by the chance to whisper into Rita's ear. Adults with darker pasts also recognized the power of her quill. Some of these informants had once sympathized with Voldemort's ideology, but they discovered that Skeeter's hunger for scandal gave them a platform to harm their enemies without openly revealing their loyalties. When whispers reached her that Albus Dumbledore had once been close to Gellert Grindelwald, Skeeter knew she had found gold. The fact that these whispers came from families with well-documented Death Eater ties did not disturb her in the slightest. What mattered was how easily scandal could be transformed into sales. Her book, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, stands as the ultimate testament to her questionable sources. In it, she quoted Bathilda Bagshot, who, under the effects of confusion and age, provided fragmented memories that Skeeter spun into damning revelations. She included the testimony of Aberforth Dumbledore, though heavily distorted, and wove in malicious gossip from families like the Carrows, who were known to sympathize with Voldemort. The result was a book that blurred truth and falsehood until readers were left unsure what to believe. She quoted herself as uncovering the shameful secrets that Albus Dumbledore hoped would never see the light of day, yet the weight of her accusations relied on voices whose credibility was more than questionable. The way Skeeter framed her writing ensured that doubt lingered even when facts were absent. Her sentences carried an air of certainty, filled with phrases like, "it is believed," or "close friends confide." By attributing her rumors to unnamed acquaintances, she shielded herself from scrutiny while simultaneously inviting the reader to imagine that behind every curtain there was a witness whispering the truth. For the public, the illusion was intoxicating. For the subjects of her writing, it was devastating. Harry himself often felt powerless to fight back, realizing that once Skeeter printed a lie, it spread faster than any correction ever could. One of the clearest examples of her methods can be seen in her portrayal of Hermione Granger during the Triwizard Tournament. Skeeter suggested that Hermione was cruelly toying with the hearts of both Harry and Victor Krum. She described Hermione as a plain but ambitious girl who has discovered the delights of fame at last. The idea came directly from conversations with Parkinson, who despised Hermione for her intelligence and her friendship with Harry. But Skeeter's gift was her ability to present such gossip in polished, almost academic prose as though it had been researched and confirmed. Even readers who knew better could not help but wonder if there might be some hidden truth. The wizarding world itself enabled her behavior. People were hungry for scandal, for stories that made their heroes look human and their enemies look monstrous. Skeeter thrived on that hunger. She knew that facts were dry, but innuendo was intoxicating. A line in her article about Harry fainting during divination class was turned into evidence that he suffered from mental instability, a rumor that echoed even among those who had witnessed the fainting and knew its cause. Once again, she used dubious sources, students who were eager to mock Harry, to reinforce her narrative of the disturbed boy who lived. Her animagus ability added another layer to her arsenal of questionable tactics. As a beetle, she could hide in curtains, on window ledges, or even on the rim of a glass, eavesdropping on private conversations and gathering scraps of dialogue that she later presented as full testimonies. The sources she cited might never have realized they had been overheard, making her articles doubly insidious. It was not just that her informants were biased or malicious. Sometimes they were completely unaware that their careless words were about to become front-page news. The fact that Skeeter never registered her animagus form only underlined how little regard she had for rules or ethics when chasing a story. Number 17, a style impossible to confuse. Rita Skeeter's reputation in the wizarding world was not built on dry reporting, nor on carefully measured political commentary, but on the distinct flavor of her prose, a style so exaggerated and barbed that it could never be mistaken for anyone else's. She wove her articles as if they were stage plays, heavy with drama, dripping with insinuation, and embroidered with adjectives that turned ordinary events into scenes of high scandal. J.K. Rowling once described her in the books with deliberate disdain, but within the fictional universe, Rita's quill made her both feared and read. Readers opened the Daily Prophet not for facts, but for spectacle, and Rita delivered that in abundance. Even if her name was missing from the byline, the dramatic slant, the poisoned compliments, and the performative shock that dripped from her sentences made it obvious whose hand had guided the Quicksilver quill. Her most memorable work came during the Triwizard Tournament, when she followed Harry Potter's every move with an obsessive eye. She turned what should have been a noble competition into a three-ring circus. The opening task, in which Harry faced the Hungarian horntail, was already dramatic enough on its own, but Rita painted it with grotesque flourishes. She described Harry as a skinny boy with untidy hair and a taste for heroics far beyond his years, suggesting recklessness rather than courage. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, she even wrote about him with the cruel suggestion that tragically misunderstood Harry Potter, the boy who cries alone at night in the Gryffindor Tower, was a fragile, traumatized figure manipulated by others. In truth, Harry had never uttered a word of such confessions, but Rita's long metaphors and sly implications were so vivid that the line between fact and fiction disappeared for many readers. The genius of Rita's style was its ability to manipulate emotions. She specialized in taking a kernel of reality and inflating it into something sensational. Victor Krum's friendship with Hermione Granger, for example, could have been covered as a simple story about an international student attending the Yule Ball. Yet Rita transformed it into a scandal about Hermione supposedly toying with the affections of two famous young men. Her article crowed that Hermione was playing with the hearts of both Harry Potter and Victor Krum, turning a 15-year-old girl into a femme fatale. To read her piece was to be swept into the performance of it, whether one believed it or not. The exaggeration was the point, and in exaggeration, Rita reigned supreme. Her gift lay in rhythm and imagery. She used long, winding sentences laced with adjectives to create the illusion of authority, as though the sheer weight of her description proved the accuracy of her claims. A boy of 14 forced into a competition that even grown wizards fear to enter, shaking and pale beneath the shadow of the mighty dragon, she would write, and the words sounded too polished to question. The way she piled on metaphors, describing Harry as a young lamb led to the slaughter, or a tragic figure drowning in a sea of expectations, gave her articles a theatrical quality. These flourishes were designed not to inform but to mesmerize, and in that sense, her style functioned more like propaganda than journalism. One of her most biting traits was her use of sly commentary, those little barbed asides that cut deeper than any factual accusation. When she covered Harry's supposed romantic entanglements, she hinted that Hermione's supposed ambition for fame might be the true reason for her closeness to the boy who lived. By inserting judgment into description, Rita blurred the lines between reporting and gossip. Readers would find themselves repeating her insinuations, not because they were proven, but because her sentences lodged themselves like hooks in memory. She understood human weakness, the desire to whisper and speculate, and she weaponized it with ink. The magical element of Rita's writing also played a role in its distinctive style. Her enchanted quick quotes quill wrote not what was said, but what would make the best story. It exaggerated, twisted, and adorned the spoken word until it bore little resemblance to the truth. Hermione, outraged by its distortions, once snatched the quill and watched in fury as it continued scribbling insults even when untouched. This quill was not just a tool, it was a manifestation of Rita's philosophy. Facts alone were never enough for her. She sought to dress them up in theatrical costume, to turn interviews into monologues of pathos and melodrama. The quill's tendency to improve the truth perfectly captured Rita's own inclination to do the same. The power of her style lay in its ability to make readers believe they were being entertained rather than manipulated. The Triwizard Tournament, the Yule Ball, even the private griefs of Harry and Hermione, Rita reframed them all as chapters in a serialized drama. She was not content to let the story end with a simple who won and who lost. Instead, she insisted on suggesting hidden motives, secret romances, and unspoken tragedies. Her readers became addicted to her version of events because they promised not just news, but revelation. Every article implied that something shocking lurked beneath the surface, and only Rita had the daring to expose it. A striking example can be found in the way she described Harry after the first task. While the Daily Prophet should have been reporting his triumph in escaping a dragon, Rita instead emphasized his supposed vulnerability. She claimed that Harry had been seen sobbing into his pillow in the dead of night, words that came not from observation, but invention. The detail was false, yet it was painted so vividly that readers could almost see it. The image of the boy who lived crying alone was powerful enough to circulate through the wizarding world, warping public perception of Harry as unstable. Here, Rita's distinctive style was not just a quirk, it was a weapon with real consequences. Number 18. The secret of her popularity. Of all the secondary characters in the Harry Potter world, Rita Skeeter remains one of the most paradoxical. She is despised by the main heroes, her reputation is endlessly questioned, and yet within the wizarding community she commands an audience that cannot resist her. The paradox of her popularity lies not in the trustworthiness of her words, but in the irresistible magnetism of her style. Even readers who rolled their eyes at her exaggerations and outright inventions lined up for her next column. It was not loyalty to Rita as a person, it was loyalty to the thrill she provided. A wizarding society accustomed to cautious ministry reports and bland Daily Prophet updates found in her writing something louder, bolder, and far more entertaining. That was her secret. She sold drama in a world already steeped in magic, and people devoured it because it felt more dangerous than spells and curses. Her ability to attract such an audience can be best understood by revisiting the Daily Prophet during the Triwizard Tournament. Harry Potter himself, though officially championed by Hogwarts, was constantly vilified by Rita's quill. A boy with a tragic past, a thirst for attention, and a dangerous tendency toward heroics, she wrote, distorting Harry's every move into sensationalist fodder. Hermione Granger saw through every trick, furious that the truth was being bent to fit scandalous headlines, and yet those articles spread faster than Professor Dumbledore's speeches or Ludo Bagman's official announcements. The public hung on her. Words not because they believed every detail, but because they wanted to. Curiosity triumphed over skepticism. Readers knew that if Harry sneezed, Rita would turn it into a national crisis, and that was exactly what kept them buying the paper. It is telling that Hermione, usually so logical, was one of the few who openly voiced just how dangerous Rita's talent was. In The Goblet of Fire, she angrily pointed out, she makes things up, she invents stories. But even Hermione's outrage only added fuel to Skeeter's mystique. People whispered about Rita's methods, wondering how she uncovered details no one else could. That mystery became part of her allure. Later, when it was revealed that she was an unregistered animagus, a beetle who could slip into any conversation unnoticed, the pieces of the puzzle finally aligned. Her articles seemed omniscient, not because she had better sources, but because she could cheat. And still, once the truth was known, her readership did not collapse. If anything, the scandal cemented her image as the journalist who would stop at nothing, a woman whose hunger for a story transcended the limits of law and ethics. Another reason Rita retained her audience was the psychology of gossip itself. Wizarding Britain, despite its magical innovations, mirrored the Muggle world in its appetite for scandal. Readers could pretend to scorn Skeeter's exaggerations, but they could not deny the thrill of peeking into the private lives of celebrities and heroes. When Rita published The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, even those who revered the headmaster bought the book in droves. Harry himself admitted the sting of betrayal when he saw how eagerly the wizarding public devoured pages questioning Dumbledore's legacy. The allure lay in the idea that even icons had shadows, that even saints bore sins. Rita understood this craving better than anyone, and she exploited it mercilessly. Consider how her book about Dumbledore became a cultural earthquake. Instead of reverent biography, she delivered biting revelations: Dumbledore's friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, the tragedy of Ariana, the secrecy that cloaked his family. Some passages were rooted in truth, others clearly twisted, but the mixture created a storm of fascination. Matilda Bagshot's testimony was stretched and mangled, yet readers accepted it because it promised intimacy with a man who had always seemed untouchable. Skeeter's words, "the greater good," a phrase that haunted Dumbledore's youth, made people feel they had peered behind the curtain. Even those who cursed her name read her work with trembling fingers, unwilling to look away from the spectacle she conjured. What makes her case even more compelling is that she thrived in an environment where credibility should have been essential. The Ministry, for all its faults, demanded facts. The Order of the Phoenix valued loyalty and truth. Yet Rita's career flourished parallel to both sides of the war. Why? Because war itself sharpened the appetite for rumor. In times of uncertainty, whispers travel faster than proclamations. A frightened society does not want only reassurance, it wants to prepare for betrayal, to anticipate scandal, to imagine the worst. Rita was the embodiment of this fear turned into narrative. By painting every hero as a possible villain, she gave readers what they craved, the illusion that they were one step ahead of the truth. Skeeter's writing style also carried a rhythm that was uniquely hers. The acid green, quick quotes, quill, was not just a prop, it was the symbol of her method. Each line was designed to be clipped, quoted, repeated at dinner tables. When she described Hermione Granger as a plain but ambitious girl, not above breaking hearts to secure her place, it was not a statement to be proven, but a line to be remembered. In the same way that a spell echoed when spoken aloud, her words lingered in the air. The exaggeration became the memory, and the Truth was left behind. People may not have believed every word, but they remembered every phrase, and in journalism, memory is more powerful than accuracy. It is important, too, to note that Rita's audience was not limited to the gullible. Even the skeptical found themselves drawn to her work, precisely because it was audacious. Serious-minded witches and wizards could scoff, roll their eyes, and still turn the page. They read her not to be informed, but to be entertained. This dual readership, the credulous and the cynical, guaranteed her dominance. The credulous treated her as profit, the cynical as guilty pleasure. Both groups fueled her sales, ensuring that her name remained in circulation no matter how loudly Harry or Hermione condemned her. Rita Skeeter also filled a void in wizarding media. The Daily Prophet was the primary source of news, but it often read like a ministry bulletin. Wizarding Wireless Network offered entertainment, but it lacked the spice of scandal. Skeeter combined the two, the appearance of news with the pulse of entertainment. She blurred the line between journalism and performance, which meant that even when readers distrusted her, they could not deny her charisma. She was, in effect, the first true celebrity journalist in the wizarding world, and her persona became as much a product as her words. One striking example of her enduring pull comes in the Deathly Hallows. At a moment when Voldemort's shadow loomed largest, Skeeter's book about Dumbledore still managed to dominate conversations. Xenophilius Lovegood, eccentric editor of the Quibbler, was known for embracing conspiracies, but even he was forced to acknowledge the stir Skeeter had caused. That a single woman could shape discourse during such a crisis speaks volumes about her influence. War was raging, people were disappearing, yet they paused to debate the authenticity of Dumbledore's past as presented by Rita Skeeter. This power to redirect attention, to make the private lives of icons seem more urgent than mortal danger, is the clearest indicator of why she remained relevant. Skeeter's critics, of course, saw her methods as toxic. Hermione's decision to blackmail her using the secret of her animagus form shows just how desperate the heroes were to silence her. This act was not simply about protecting Harry or Hagrid from further slander, it was about curbing the wildfire Rita represented, and yet silencing her did not erase her readership. The appetite she had cultivated remained simmering under the surface. Readers who once feasted on her words found themselves restless without her, and when she returned with her book on Dumbledore, the hunger reignited instantly. Her audience had not vanished, it had only been waiting. The paradox of Skeeter's popularity also lies in her role as a mirror. She reflected not the truth of events, but the desires of the public. Wizards and witches might have claimed to value honesty, but the sales of her books revealed otherwise. What they wanted was drama, scandal, intimacy, and spectacle. Rita gave them all of this in abundance. She was not merely writing stories, she was feeding an addiction. Like divination, her words were less about prediction and more about projection. Readers saw what they wanted to see, and Skeeter gave them permission to indulge in it without shame. If one strips away the disdain her peers held for her, Skeeter's place in history becomes clearer. She was not a chronicler of events, but a shaper of perception. Harry's heroism, Dumbledore's wisdom, Hermione's intelligence, all were recast through her quill into something at once more grotesque and more captivating. The irony is that even when readers rejected her conclusions, they remembered her framing. Heroes became human, flaws became amplified, and the myth of perfection was shattered. In that sense, Skeeter democratized fame. No one was untouchable, not even Dumbledore himself. Ultimately, the secret of Rita Skeeter's popularity rests on a truth as old as storytelling itself. People crave spectacle more than certainty. The wizarding world could forgive a ministry mistake, but it could not resist a scandalous headline. Rita knew how to turn fear into fascination, privacy into performance, and doubt into entertainment. That was why her books outsold the official chronicles, why her articles traveled faster than ministry decrees, and why, despite universal scorn, she never lacked for readers. In her hands, Gossip became its own kind of magic, dangerous, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. Number 19. Scandal around Victor Krum. Rita Skeeter thrived in chaos, and the Triwizard Tournament was fertile ground for her pen dipped in poison. The moment Victor Krum's name was announced as Durmstrang's champion, her eyes narrowed not on his skill or courage, but on the glimmer of scandal she could spin. Krum was a Quidditch star, a seeker for the Bulgarian national team, and adored worldwide for his talent on the broomstick. Yet Skeeter saw none of this as worthy of praise, unless it could be twisted into spectacle. In her article for the Daily Prophet, she painted him as arrogant, aloof, and obsessed with his own reflection, carefully omitting the truth that Krum was actually reserved and painfully shy, a young man who preferred quiet corners to roaring crowds. To Skeeter, honesty had no value, sensation did. Her focus sharpened when she noticed Hermione Granger seated in the library beside him. Hermione, already labelled by Skeeter as a bookish know-it-all, suddenly became a convenient character in the tale Skeeter was writing. The Quidditch superstar and the plain Hogwarts schoolgirl formed the perfect recipe for gossip. In one notorious passage, Skeeter described Hermione as a plain but ambitious girl, toying with the affections of international Quidditch stars, a line that spread through the halls of Hogwarts like wildfire. The supposed romance was framed as Hermione attempting to climb the social ladder by attaching herself to Krum, a claim designed not to reflect reality but to draw gasps and sneers from readers eager for scandal. The cruelty of the article was amplified by Skeeter's deliberate refusal to acknowledge Krum's true nature. Harry himself noticed how Krum, though famous, often kept to himself, choosing the library as a refuge from constant attention. When he invited Hermione to the Yule Ball, it was not as a boastful display but as a quiet gesture, awkwardly expressed in his thick Bulgarian accent. The real Krum was uncomfortable with fame, yet Skeeter's pen recast his introversion as haughty indifference. Victor Krum, brooding and mysterious, ignores his competitors and fans alike, she wrote, suggesting arrogance where in fact there was only shyness. The irony was bitter. Skeeter's caricature of Krum was the complete opposite of the boy hiding behind heavy brows and silence. What made matters worse was how the article damaged Hermione's standing among her peers. Ron Weasley, already insecure and envious of Krum, swallowed Skeeter's words whole, amplifying his own resentment. Harry remembered how Ron's ears turned red at the sight of Hermione's name in the Prophet, branded as some sort of manipulator of men. Hermione, though furious, could not escape the whispers in the corridors and the pointed glares of her classmates. The scandal became less about Krum's supposed arrogance and more about Hermione's imagined ambition, a clever deflection on Skeeter's part to make the story sting harder. It was never about truth. It was about the drama that kept readers talking. Victor himself was deeply unsettled. Accustomed to being misrepresented in the press, he rarely responded to rumors, but Skeeter's insinuations struck at something more personal. For the first time he had allowed himself a connection beyond Quidditch, and now it was dragged into the mud for entertainment. His quiet moments with Hermione in the library, where she helped him with English pronunciations, and he listened intently to her explanations of arithmancy, were transformed into calculated moves of seduction in Skeeter's retelling. He felt betrayed by the very idea that kindness and friendship could be weaponized against him. In the end, his discomfort only reinforced the false image Skeeter had drawn as he retreated even further into silence. The power of Skeeter's words came not only from her imagination, but from her unique advantage as an unregistered animagus. Transforming into a beetle, she crept into places unseen, listening to conversations never meant for her ears. This trick allowed her to piece together fragments of truth, then lace them with exaggeration, until the story became unrecognizable. One can imagine her perched on the window of the library, hearing snippets of Hermione coaching Krum, then hurrying to her desk to draft a paragraph about the unlikely romance blossoming in the shadows. This method ensured that every tale had just enough fact to sound believable, yet enough fiction to cause outrage. The scandal surrounding Krum was not an isolated act of malice, but part of Skeeter's broader pattern. In the same tournament, she tore into Harry Potter with equal viciousness. Branding him unstable and attention-seeking, she accused Hagrid of being unfit to teach, exposing his giant heritage to humiliate him. Skeeter's skill was never in uncovering truth, but in identifying vulnerabilities and magnifying them into controversies. In Krum, she saw the vulnerability of fame and introversion. In Hermione, the vulnerability of being a Muggle-born girl standing out too much. Together, these made for a perfect storm of gossip that the student body consumed eagerly, proving Skeeter's dark intuition about human curiosity correct. The reaction among Hogwarts students revealed the potency of her narrative. For weeks after the article's publication, Hermione could scarcely walk down the corridor without overhearing whispers. Girls scoffed at her supposed ambition, while boys eyed her with curiosity, wondering if the prophet's description held truth. Krum, meanwhile, became the subject of hushed jokes, with some mocking his accent and others echoing Skeeter's description of his brooding demeanour. Yet the irony remained that those who mocked had never spoken to him, never seen his small, awkward smile when Hermione explained something that puzzled him. Skeeter had replaced the boy with a caricature, and the caricature was far louder than reality. Hermione's response to the scandal displayed the resilience that defined her character. Rather than succumb to humiliation, she became determined to expose Skeeter's methods. By the end of the year, her suspicion that Skeeter was sneaking into places unnaturally had crystallized into certainty. With help from Harry and Ron, she eventually trapped Skeeter in her beetle form inside a jar, the first real check on Skeeter's manipulative power. It was poetic justice that the same girl Skeeter had mocked as ambitious would be the one to halt her career, at least temporarily. The episode revealed Hermione's strength, but it also highlighted how much damage had already been done in the meantime. The scandal also forced Harry to reflect on the corrosive nature of wizarding media. For a boy whose every step was scrutinized, Skeeter's attacks on Krum and Hermione served as a mirror of what he himself endured. In Goblet of Fire, Harry recalls reading with disgust how Skeeter portrayed him as unstable, suggesting he had been disturbed by his fame. He recognized in Krum's frustration a shared struggle, that of being twisted into something unrecognizable for the sake of entertainment. The press, in Skeeter's hands, became not a source of information, but a weapon that sowed division, envy, and humiliation. Krum's scandal was only one more example in a long line of such abuses. What lingers most powerfully from this episode is the sense of injustice. Krum, far from the self-absorbed athlete Skeeter described, showed humility and kindness when it mattered. He risked his life in the dangerous tasks of the tournament, protected Fleur Delacour's sister Gabrielle from the depths of the Black Lake, and treated Hermione with respect rather than the condescension Skeeter implied. Yet in the collective memory of Hogwarts students during that year, it was not his courage that stood out, but the whisper of romance Skeeter planted. In this way, her article succeeded in erasing heroism and replacing it with trivial scandal, a crime of words as damaging as any curse. The cruelty of Skeeter's narrative also revealed a truth about readers. The Daily Prophet was not forced into anyone's hands. It was eagerly consumed. Students and adults alike wanted to believe that Hermione was cunningly ambitious, that Krum was broodingly vain. Gossip, after all, was far more entertaining than humility. Skeeter's genius lay in understanding this appetite and feeding it, ensuring that her stories, however false, became the ones people remembered. It is telling that years later, when Hermione recounted her frustrations, she admitted that the hardest part was not Skeeter herself, but the ease with which others believed her lies. Dumbledore himself offered a subtle commentary on this culture of scandal. When Skeeter's articles disrupted the tournament, he did not confront her directly, but he reminded his students and staff of the importance of discernment. "It matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be," he once told them, words that could easily apply to how Krum was misjudged. Yet even his wisdom could not erase the sting of Skeeter's inventions. The damage was done, and though Hermione's cleverness later neutralized Skeeter, the scars of ridicule lingered for both her and Krum. In the end, Skeeter's scandal surrounding Victor Krum exemplified the danger of unchecked journalism in the wizarding world. It was not merely about one false portrayal, but about how a gifted athlete and a bright student were reduced to pawns in a narrative designed for profit. If you want to know what a man's like, take a good look at how he treats his inferiors, Sirius Black once said, and by that measure, Krum's decency was evident in every small act. Skeeter's article ignored this because decency does not sell papers. The story that endured was not of Krum's bravery or Hermione's intelligence, but of a fabricated romance that existed only in the poisonous ink of Rita Skeeter. Number 20. Hatred toward Hagrid. Rita Skeeter never chose her subjects at random. When the Triwizard Tournament began in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, she prowled the castle corridors like a predator searching for weaknesses, and she soon fixed her gaze on Rubeus Hagrid. To Skeeter, the gentle half-giant represented not warmth and loyalty, but a scandal waiting to be exploited. She knew his towering size and booming voice could be twisted into menace, and when she uncovered his family history, she realized she held a weapon sharper than any quill. Her article in the Daily Prophet would not merely report facts, it would craft a narrative of fear, suspicion, and prejudice, all calculated to leave Hagrid exposed. The scandal began when Skeeter revealed Hagrid's lineage. For years he had kept the truth hidden, speaking only vaguely about his absent parents. It was Skeeter who declared to the wizarding world that his mother had been the giantess Fridwulfa. This revelation, seemingly harmless as a genealogical detail, was in fact dynamite in the brittle climate of the wizarding community. Giants were feared and despised, associated with violence and allegiance to Voldemort. By writing, half-giant Rubeus Hagrid has been entrusted with the care of Hogwarts students. Skeeter struck directly at the trust between the school and the parents. Her words implied danger where none truly existed, making Hagrid appear as though he carried his mother's blood like a curse. The cruelty of her article lay not only in the information it contained, but in the timing. The Triwizard Tournament was already surrounded by tension, and Harry Potter himself was struggling under the weight of Skeeter's relentless smears. By targeting Hagrid in the midst of this spectacle, Skeeter ensured that her story would spread like wildfire. She painted the portrait of a dangerous caretaker, conveniently forgetting the kindness Hagrid had shown Harry, Ron, and Hermione since their first days at Hogwarts. To Skeeter, the truth was malleable. What mattered was the shock value. In her hands, Hagrid was not a loyal friend, but a potential threat, a half-giant looming too close to children. One of the most striking consequences of Skeeter's article was the reaction among the parents of Hogwarts students. The book tells us that many of them wrote furious letters demanding to know why someone with giant blood was allowed near their children. They feared that Hagrid might lose control of his temper, or that his size alone would make him a danger. What Skeeter had done was inflame the oldest prejudice, the belief that one's blood determines one's character. The wizarding world, with its obsession over pure blood heritage, was already steeped in this mindset, and Skeeter had simply poured gasoline onto the fire. For Hagrid, the humiliation was crushing. He withdrew from his duties, too ashamed to face the students. The man who had always stood proudly in the open now hid himself away, shutting the door of his hut against the whispers. He stopped attending meals in the great hall and neglected his teaching. It was Hermione who understood most quickly what had been done to him, and she encouraged Harry and Ron to continue supporting Hagrid openly. Yet the damage had been done, and the half-giant's spirit had been pierced. When Dumbledore himself came to speak with Hagrid, reminding him that he was valued at Hogwarts, readers could sense the depth of the wound Skeeter had inflicted. The The text of Skeeter's article was a masterpiece of insinuation. She did not have to call Hagrid dangerous outright. She only needed to place his bloodline next to words like giant and Hogwarts children, and the rest took care of itself. It is a textbook example of how journalism can be wielded not to inform but to harm. Rowling writes that Hagrid's face was a mask of misery after the story appeared, and the reader feels the weight of betrayal. Skeeter had unearthed a truth not to enlighten, but to exploit. Her pen was not dipped in ink, but in poison, and she administered it with a gleeful precision. What makes Skeeter's hatred of Hagrid so significant is that it had no foundation in personal grievance. She had not been wronged by him, nor did she have a reason to attack him other than the fact that his life contained material that could be turned into a scandal. It shows the cold mechanics of her character. She viewed people as stepping stones toward notoriety. The more shocking the story, the higher her star would rise. Hagrid was simply convenient, a man with secrets in his blood and a vulnerability Skeeter could exploit with relish. The choice of Hagrid also reveals Skeeter's understanding of her audience. She knew that fear sells. Readers of the Daily Prophet were drawn to tales that confirmed their anxieties, that painted the world as perilous and fraught with hidden threats. A half-giant teaching their children was a perfect headline because it struck at both parental instinct and social prejudice. The wizarding community's unease with giants, combined with their skepticism toward Dumbledore's unconventional decisions, created fertile ground for outrage. Skeeter did not invent the prejudice, she simply magnified it. There is a telling passage when Hagrid admits to Harry that he thought Dumbledore might regret giving him a chance. "I should have known," Hagrid mutters, broken by shame. These words capture the destructive power of Skeeter's article more than any analysis could. She had not only attacked his reputation, but corroded his confidence in himself. Hagrid had always been conscious of his size and background, but until Skeeter's article, he had believed in his place at Hogwarts. Her story forced him to confront his deepest insecurities, twisting them into weapons. It was not just slander, it was psychological cruelty. Interestingly, Skeeter's attack on Hagrid parallels her treatment of Harry during the tournament. In both cases, she sought to exploit vulnerability, Harry's youth, his supposed thirst for fame, and Hagrid's bloodline. Her strategy was consistent: magnify a person's weakest point until it defined them entirely. To the public, Harry became a reckless boy who enjoyed attention, while Hagrid became a dangerous half-giant. Both were caricatures, not truths, and both served Skeeter's need for sensational stories. Rowling's inclusion of Skeeter's article serves as a commentary on prejudice within the wizarding world. Hagrid's suffering illustrates how deeply rooted these biases were. Even a man who had saved Harry from the ruins of Godric's Hollow, who had carried the boy in his giant arms to safety, could be reduced to an object of suspicion when his parentage was revealed. The cruelty of the public reaction underscores how fragile acceptance can be when it is built on ignorance and fear. Hagrid had not changed, only people's perception of him had. What stands out in this episode is the contrast between Skeeter's cruelty and the loyalty of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Despite the gossip swirling through the castle, they continued to attend Hagrid's classes, showing their belief in him. Hermione, in particular, displayed her outrage at Skeeter's tactics. Her later efforts to uncover Skeeter's secret, her ability as an unregistered animagus, can be read as a form of justice for Hagrid. Hermione's indignation was not only on Harry's behalf, but also on behalf of Hagrid, whose suffering she had witnessed firsthand. The episode also demonstrates Dumbledore's unwavering faith in those who were marginalized. By standing by Hagrid and reminding him of his worth, Dumbledore rejected the hysteria Skeeter had ignited. His calm confidence in Hagrid's character stood as a counterbalance to Skeeter's venom. In many ways, this moment encapsulates one of the core themes of the series, the difference between judging someone by their blood and judging them by their choices. Skeeter symbolized the former, Dumbledore the latter. Ultimately, the attack on Hagrid left scars but did not define him. He returned to his duties, buoyed by the support of his friends and the resilience that had carried him through a lifetime of prejudice. Yet the incident lingers in the reader's mind as one of the cruelest moments orchestrated by Skeeter. Her deliberate exposure of his heritage, her willingness to inflame public opinion, and her exploitation of fear reveal not just a journalist hungry for scandal, but a character who thrived on cruelty. The narrative makes clear that Rita Skeeter's quill was never about truth, it was about power, and in the case of Rubeus Hagrid, that power came at the cost of dignity, safety, and peace of mind. Number 21. Subtle favoritism toward Lucius Malfoy. Rita Skeeter built her career on sharp quills and sharper words. Her articles in the Daily Prophet were notorious for their venom, and her ability to twist a phrase made her both feared and admired. She had a gift for sniffing out scandal, real or invented, and she wielded her influence like a weapon. Yet among the many figures she skewered in print, one man stood curiously unscathed, Lucius Malfoy. Where others found themselves shredded by Rita's acid descriptions, Malfoy appeared almost polished by her words, his reputation burnished even when suspicion clung to him. It is this curious protection that invites deeper scrutiny, suggesting that Rita's quill, so merciless against others, might have paused out of admiration, or perhaps opportunism. Consider the summer of 1994, when the Quidditch World Cup brought together wizards from every corner of the globe. The event ended in chaos, with Death Eaters marching in masks and terror spreading among the spectators. Many high-ranking families came under suspicion, and whispers swirled around those with known sympathies for Voldemort's old regime. Yet when Rita reported on the scandal, her words fell not on Lucius Malfoy, whose silver-haired figure had been seen gliding through the top box that very night, but on nameless troublemakers and drunken hooligans. She described the events with relish, but Malfoy's name was conspicuously absent. It was as though her quill skipped over him deliberately, sparing him the indignity she so freely bestowed upon others. The contrast becomes starker when one recalls how Rita treated Arthur Weasley. Though Arthur was respected in the ministry for his integrity, she never missed an opportunity to belittle him. She labelled him Muggle-loving and portrayed his career as unimpressive. "This is no time to be wasting ministry resources on trivial obsessions with Muggles," she wrote, underlining his supposed incompetence. Yet Lucius Malfoy, Arthur's open rival, never received such barbed treatment. Instead, he appeared in Rita's articles as a man of status, influence, and respectability. It was not objectivity that guided her pen, but something more personal, perhaps a recognition of power, perhaps a calculated bet on which connections would prove most lucrative. Lucius himself was a master of charm. He knew how to play the ministry, offering donations and subtle bribes, cloaked under the appearance of generosity. His seat on the Hogwarts Board of Governors gave him visibility and prestige, and even after his hand in opening the Chamber of Secrets was revealed, his punishment was astonishingly light. In Chamber of Secrets, Dumbledore reminds him, the governors suspended you, but you managed to slip free again. This slipperiness made him dangerous, but also, to a journalist like Rita, valuable. To turn her quill against Malfoy would be to risk cutting herself off from a source of influence, money, and information. Sword. Far easier, and far more profitable, to flatter him, to ensure that his silver cane might one day tap at her office door with secrets worth printing. There is also the peculiar tone of deference in the way she describes certain elite families. When Rita Skeeter wrote about the Malfoys, the emphasis was always on their wealth, their lineage, their elegance. She did not cast suspicion on their alliances with darker circles, as she did with others, but rather painted a portrait of an old family with noble ties. In Goblet of Fire, Lucius is seen contributing to St. Mungo's and sitting in the minister's box as though nothing could ever tarnish him. Rita, who could have questioned why such a man remained untouched by scandal, instead reinforced his aura. Her choice of language elevated him, subtly shielding him from the very doubts her journalism thrived on. One must also examine her selective silence. Skeeter was infamous for her invasive animagus spying, transforming into a beetle to eavesdrop where no one thought to look. She uncovered secrets about Hagrid's giant heritage, about Harry's nightmares, about Hermione's supposed romantic entanglements. Yet with access to the private dealings of the wizarding elite, how did she never expose Lucius Malfoy's ties to the Death Eaters? It defies belief that she, who ferreted out trivial gossip with ruthless efficiency, overlooked the darker truths about a man whose mask had slipped before. This silence suggests not ignorance, but choice. Rita Skeeter may well have known too much, and for reasons of survival or self-interest, she kept her parchment clean of his sins. The possibility of admiration cannot be ignored. Rita adored power, and Lucius embodied it. His wealth draped him in finery, his connections elevated him, and his cold charisma made him untouchable. To a woman who thrived on aligning herself with strength, he was irresistible. She may not have loved him, but she respected what he represented: control, dominance, and immunity. It is telling that while she mocked Cornelius Fudge with subtle jabs about incompetence, she never turned her pen against Malfoy. Fudge could be undermined, but Lucius was a fortress, and perhaps Rita wished to stand near its gates rather than assault its walls. The question remains whether there was an actual arrangement between them. Lucius Malfoy understood that influence was currency, and Rita Skeeter was a merchant of public opinion. It would have cost him little to ensure her cooperation: golden galleons, promises of exclusives, or the occasional whispered secret from the ministry corridors. Rita, in turn, would protect his image, ensuring that his name rarely appeared in conjunction with the scandals that dogged other families. Their alliance would have been mutually beneficial, a silent contract between quill and cane, ink and influence. The irony is that her bias did not go unnoticed by those who read between the lines. For those paying attention, the absence of Malfoy's name in her columns was more suspicious than any accusation. Students at Hogwarts whispered about his father's influence, and order members certainly knew the truth. Yet to the average reader of the Daily Prophet who trusted Rita's venomous reports, Lucius remained an untouchable aristocrat. This illusion helped him maintain his facade, and Skeeter became complicit in preserving the mask he wore so well. Specific examples sharpened the point. After the Triwizard Tournament, when Voldemort had returned and the graveyard had claimed Cedric Diggory's life, the wizarding world trembled with fear. Harry insisted on the truth, but the prophet, guided by voices like Rita's, cast him as unstable. Lucius Malfoy, present at Voldemort's rebirth, remained free of accusation in her pages. Not only did Rita discredit Harry, but her silence over Malfoy ensured that the Death Eater's reintegration into society went unchallenged. The balance of blame was tipped away from the guilty and toward the vulnerable, a tactic that reveals more about her loyalties than she would ever admit. Her favoritism also demonstrates the dangerous symbiosis between media and power. Rita Skeeter shaped public opinion not by lying outright, but by emphasizing some truths while omitting others. By writing "Harry Potter's disturbed state raises questions about the boy's stability," she directed suspicion at a child, while shielding a man who funded Voldemort's rise. The effect was profound. The wizarding world was misled, their trust exploited. Lucius Malfoy's ability to maneuver so freely was not only due to his own cunning, but also to the silent allies who held the quill, shaping narratives in his favor. The portrait that emerges is unsettling. Rita Skeeter, who prided herself on her investigative instincts, acted less as a seeker of truth and more as a servant of influence. Her articles reveal where her true sympathies lay, not with justice, not with the vulnerable, but with those who could reward her silence. Lucius Malfoy benefited from this alignment. His sins softened, his image burnished. The absence of criticism became its own kind of praise, more insidious than open flattery, because it concealed what should have been exposed. Even when Lucius fell from grace after the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, his arrest and disgrace splashed across the wizarding world, Rita's quill was notably restrained. By then her career had shifted, and she had been momentarily muzzled by Hermione Granger's blackmail. But the years prior had already revealed her pattern. Her careful handling of Malfoy's image had allowed him to operate in the shadows far longer than he might have otherwise. She had lent him the cover of legitimacy, and in doing so she had played a part in prolonging his influence. What remains is the lingering suspicion that Rita Skeeter's restraint was not accidental. Whether it was admiration for Malfoy's power, fear of his retaliation, or a transactional alliance of mutual benefit, the evidence is clear. Lucius Malfoy received from Rita Skeeter what almost no one else did: leniency. And in the ruthless world of wizarding politics, leniency was more valuable than any public praise, for it allowed a guilty man to remain invisible where others were exposed. Number 22. The Dumbledore Biography. The moment the wizarding world learned of Albus Dumbledore's death, the grief was immediate, sharp, and universal. For many witches and wizards, he was more than the headmaster of Hogwarts. He was a moral compass, a steady hand in times of chaos, and a figure of almost mythic wisdom. His fall from the astronomy tower did not just end his life, it seemed to sever a certain sense of safety in the wizarding world. Yet, before the dust of mourning could even settle, Rita Skeeter, ever the vulture circling the battlefield, prepared her quill for an altogether different task. Her book, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, was not a eulogy, but a demolition, one that threatened to shatter the carefully constructed image of the man so many revered. Rita Skeeter's approach was never one of reverence. She thrived on scandal, on whisper and rumour, and she wielded the quick quotes quill like a dagger aimed at the reputations of the powerful. In Dumbledore, she found a subject rich with contradictions and shadows. She claimed with relish that the headmaster had deceived the public for decades, hiding truths about his family, his ambitions, and his youthful mistakes. To Skeeter, Dumbledore's death was not the end of a hero's life, but the perfect opening to expose the real man behind the legend. She wrote, with acid in her sentences, that every saint has a skeleton in the closet, and in Albus Dumbledore's case, the closet was rather full. The first shock in her book concerned Dumbledore's family. Few in the wizarding community knew much about Kendra Dumbledore, the stern mother who had withdrawn her children into near seclusion after the tragic incident involving her daughter, Ariana. Skeeter presented this event not as an unfortunate accident, but as evidence of a dark family secret. "Why?" she asked in her pages. "Was Ariana never seen in public, her existence whispered, but never explained? What horrors occurred in that house in Godric's Hollow?" With sharp precision, Skeeter implied that Dumbledore's family concealed shame, that Ariana was not merely ill, but uncontrollable, and that her condition had led to violence. For readers who believed Dumbledore the embodiment of goodness, this was more than shocking. It was a betrayal of their trust in him. But Rita did not stop at family tragedies. She ventured into the forbidden territory of Dumbledore's youth, unearthing his correspondence and youthful friendships, especially with Gellert Grindelwald. The book sensationally reproduced a letter written by young Albus, in which he dreamed of a new order where wizards would rule over Muggles for the greater good. Skeeter quoted the phrase relentlessly, hammering the point that Dumbledore himself had once embraced a vision of supremacy, not unlike that which Voldemort later pursued. She wrote with venom, "What separates a visionary from a tyrant? Often only opportunity. By placing these words next to Grindelwald's rise as a dark wizard, she made Dumbledore seem complicit in ideas that haunted the wizarding world for decades. The revelation of Dumbledore's friendship with Grindelwald was perhaps the most devastating blow to his reputation. In the public mind, Grindelwald was one of the darkest figures of the 20th century, a wizard who spread terror across Europe long before Voldemort rose to power. To suggest that Dumbledore had once admired him, and worse, dreamed alongside him, cast a long shadow on the purity of Dumbledore's motives. Skeeter gleefully painted their bond as dangerous, hinting at obsession, ambition, and betrayal. He was not merely a friend, Skeeter's book claimed, but a mirror in which Dumbledore glimpsed his own darkest desires. Whether or not this was true, the scandal was undeniable. For the first time, the great defender of Muggles was accused of once planning their subjugation. Even Dumbledore's duel with Grindelwald, long celebrated as the battle that ended the Dark Wizard's reign, was reinterpreted through Skeeter's lens of suspicion. The wizarding world had hailed it as an act of courage and triumph, a sign of Dumbledore's unmatched strength and moral clarity. But Skeeter suggested otherwise, insinuating that the duel was not fought from duty but from guilt, that it was the necessary act of a man cleaning up the consequences of his own youthful recklessness. Was it heroism, she sneered in her narrative, or was it penance? Was the greatest duel of the century merely the tragic conclusion to a friendship that should never have been? Her book also lingered on the mysterious death of Dumbledore's sister, Ariana. Skeeter relished the ambiguity of the story. A three-way duel between Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald had left Ariana dead, but the curse that struck her was never identified. Skeeter exploited this uncertainty, asking in cruel italics, "Did the great Albus Dumbledore kill his own sister in the crossfire of ambition?" It was an accusation without proof, but in the world of scandal, proof mattered little. The very question was enough to stain his memory, enough to ignite whispers in wizarding taverns and parlours. For Aberforth, who already carried the grief of that night, Skeeter's words reopened wounds that never truly healed. Not content with exposing family secrets and youthful mistakes, Skeeter even cast suspicion on Dumbledore's later years at Hogwarts. She insinuated that he had kept Harry Potter close, not purely out of protection, but out of manipulation. Harry Potter, she wrote with sharp flourish, was not merely the boy who lived, he was the boy who was used. She suggested that Dumbledore had raised Harry as a weapon, groomed for the sole purpose of confronting Voldemort, knowing full well that Harry's survival was uncertain. To Skeeter, this was not the wisdom of a mentor, but the calculation of a strategist willing to sacrifice an innocent boy for the so-called greater good. Perhaps the most striking element of Skeeter's work was her style. She wrote, not like a historian, but like a gossip columnist intoxicated by her own revelations. She peppered her text with dramatic pauses, rhetorical questions, and exclamations designed to inflame rather than inform. "Can we," she asked, "continue to worship a man whose hands were not as clean as we believed? Or must we admit that the headmaster of Hogwarts was a master of deception, a puppeteer whose strings reached into every corner of our lives?" Such language ensured that her book would be read, debated, and feared. It was less a biography than a weapon aimed at the very foundation of Dumbledore's legend. For many readers, the shock was overwhelming. Witches and wizards who had named their children after Dumbledore, who had trusted his leadership during the darkest days, now looked at his memory with suspicion. Some dismissed Skeeter's book as the ravings of a woman hungry for attention, but others could not shake the doubts she planted. The timing was cruel. Dumbledore was gone, unable to defend himself, and the silence of the grave made her accusations echo louder. In some corners of the wizarding world, the question arose, had they placed too much faith in a man who was far from perfect? Yet for all its scandal, Skeeter's book was not without fragments of truth. Dumbledore himself had admitted privately to Harry that his greatest flaw was his lust for power in his youth. The letter Skeeter published was real, the friendship with Grindelwald undeniable, the family tragedies unquestionable. What Skeeter did was twist these truths, stripping them of context and empathy and presenting them as proof of hypocrisy. Where Dumbledore saw youthful mistakes and lifelong regret, Skeeter saw ammunition for her narrative of deceit. The tragedy was not that she invented everything, but that she exaggerated what little truth there was. The lasting effect of Skeeter's book was the erosion of certainty. Dumbledore, once regarded as almost infallible, was now seen as deeply human, flawed, ambitious, guilty of errors both personal and public. For some, this diminished him. For others, it made him more relatable. But Skeeter's intention was not to humanize. It was to dethrone, to tear down the saint and reveal a sinner. She succeeded in unsettling an entire generation of witches and wizards, leaving them to wonder whether their greatest champion was ever truly the man they believed him to be. Even years later, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore remains a controversial work. It is cited in academic debates, whispered about by students, and hidden away by families who prefer not to see their hero's name dragged through mud. Skeeter never apologized, nor did she retract a word. In her own conclusion, she wrote with chilling finality, "The truth is rarely pure and never simple. In Albus Dumbledore we find both brilliance and betrayal. To ignore one for the sake of the other is to live in a fairy tale, not in the real world." With these words, she sealed her work, not as mere gossip, but as a permanent crack in the marble statue of a man once thought untouchable. Number 23. Awards and Recognition. Rita Skeeter's name has always been synonymous with scandal. For many witches and wizards, her work in the Daily Prophet conjured images of half-truths, twisted words, and outright fabrications that destroyed reputations. Yet in the labyrinth of the wizarding world's press, she stood out as a figure who could never be ignored. However curious it may sound, Skeeter's penchant for sensationalism did not merely make her notorious, it also earned her something that still bewilders many readers: formal recognition and awards from her peers. This paradox reflects more than her character. It tells us about the world of magical journalism itself, where the ability to provoke emotion was once valued more highly than fidelity to fact. The most infamous moment that showcased her method was her coverage of the Triwizard Tournament. Harry Potter, just 14, found himself misrepresented in the pages of the Prophet. Skeeter described him as a tragic yet stubborn boy, perhaps craving the attention of his late parents. The words carried poison disguised as sympathy. Hermione Granger fared no better. In Skeeter's imagination, Hermione was toying with the hearts of both Harry Potter and Victor Krum, a statement so absurd that even the most credulous readers might have balked. Yet the article spread like fiend fire. Students at Hogwarts whispered, parents fretted, and even foreign wizards began forming opinions. Her stories demonstrated an unsettling truth. Accuracy could be secondary if one possessed the skill to seize an audience. It was precisely this ability that led Skeeter to win her first official recognition from the International Association of Magical Media. The award, ironically titled the Golden Quill, was given to her in 1987 for her series on the decline of the werewolf registry. Critics argued that her reporting demonized entire communities, but the award committee praised her ability to highlight dangers lurking beneath the surface of wizarding society. That phrase became a hallmark of her career. The committee did not reward her commitment to justice. They rewarded her talent for turning ordinary information into heart-pounding drama. In Skeeter's hands, the everyday became catastrophic, the personal became scandalous, and the obscure became urgent. Her peers within the profession often admitted a grudging respect. Barnabas Cuff, the editor of the Daily Prophet, once described her as the only reporter who can make a goblin rights debate sound like a dragon attack. He, of course, reaped the profits of her sensationalism, watching circulation soar whenever her byline appeared on the front page. Skeeter's colleagues, many of whom prided themselves on objective journalism, nevertheless envied her reach. She embodied what some called the magic of the headline. While many wrote with diligence and restraint, Rita understood that readers craved not balance, but thrill. Her recognition was thus as much a reward for her manipulation of the masses as it was for her quill. In 1992, she received another accolade, the Order of Merlin, 3rd Class, presented by the Ministry of Magic. To the surprise of many, the citation praised her coverage of the Crouch family's internal drama. Skeeter had revealed the story of Barty Crouch Jr.'s imprisonment and the tragic illness of Mrs. Crouch. Though her article exaggerated and twisted details, it placed her once again at the center of public attention. Cornelius Fudge himself congratulated her, stating, "The wizarding community needs voices that reveal what lies hidden." To those who knew how she operated, the award was a travesty. Yet in the eyes of officials, she served a purpose. Her pen distracted the public from larger issues and provided a spectacle that drew eyes away from the cracks forming in the ministry's power. There is a particularly telling moment in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire when Skeeter defends her own writing. The public has a right to know, she insists when confronted about her fabrications. That sentence, delivered with icy conviction, reveals her philosophy. For her, the line between truth and invention blurred under the justification of curiosity. The public's hunger excused her excess. This ideology made her both dangerous and effective. Awards, after all, rarely measured morality. They measured impact. In Skeeter's case, her impact was undeniable. What makes her recognition especially unsettling is the fact that she was not merely rewarded but celebrated for creating archetypes out of real people. Consider her portrayal of Hermione Granger. By casting Hermione as a femme fatale caught in a love triangle, Skeeter reduced a brilliant, bookish girl into a caricature of vanity and ambition. For readers, it was entertaining. For Hermione, it was torment. Yet, to the award committees, this was innovation. They praised Skeeter for her ability to breathe life into dull, political or social topics. The irony was almost unbearable. Life was breathed into her stories, not by truth, but by distortion. Even after her unmasking as an unregistered animagus, an ability she used to spy on private conversations, her reputation did not fully collapse. In fact, for some, it only enhanced her mystique. Few journalists could claim they literally transformed themselves to acquire information. Within certain circles of the magical press, her cunning was admired. The quibbler under Xenophilius Lovegood mocked her style relentlessly, yet even Lovegood admitted privately that she knew how to hold an audience. That was Skeeter's true talent. She mastered not facts, but fascination. Recognition followed because the wizarding world, like ours, has always valued the thrill of story above the integrity of information. The paradox of Skeeter's awards also reveals something about the society that produced them. In a community that often suppressed uncomfortable truths, the return of Voldemort being the most notorious example, her sensationalism was oddly useful. The ministry could count on her to fill the front pages with scandals about schoolchildren or celebrity romances, while the darker realities of corruption and war remained hidden. By rewarding her, they ensured her loyalty. Her awards were not simply acknowledgments of skill, they were political tools, a way to keep her pen pointed in the direction they desired. When Skeeter later published her unauthorized biography of Albus Dumbledore, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, many were horrified. She dragged the most revered wizard of the age through mud, exposing his family secrets and youthful friendships with Gellert Grindelwald. Yet even here, the old patterns reappeared. The book sold in enormous numbers, and for a time, Skeeter enjoyed what could only be described as literary triumph. Though she did not receive another formal award for this work, the recognition came in the form of gold and infamy. Wizards and witches whispered her name with disdain, but bought her book in droves. In that sense, her recognition was not institutional but cultural. She was an author who proved that controversy is the most reliable currency. One cannot ignore the dangerous precedent set by her celebrated career. By rewarding Skeeter, the magical community implicitly told its young journalists that manipulation could be more profitable than truth. The awards that adorned her office, rumoured to include enchanted quills and crystal inkwells, became symbols not of journalistic integrity, but of cunning and spectacle. For every witch or wizard who wished to follow a noble path like that of Bathilda Bagshot, there was another who dreamed of Skeeter's notoriety. Her recognition shaped a generation, for better or worse. The irony of Skeeter's decorated career is encapsulated in a single quote from Goblet of Fire. After one of her more vicious pieces, Harry reflects bitterly, "She makes you out to be some kind of tragic hero, doesn't she?" The line captures both the absurdity and the power of her craft. Even the boy who lived could not resist becoming a pawn in her theatre of words. The awards she received merely formalized what was already true. Rita Skeeter did not report on the world, she performed it. The lesson her career leaves behind is not easily dismissed. In Skeeter's world, truth was pliable, recognition could be won by distortion, and awards were granted for the ability to unsettle. She proved that in the wizarding press, credibility could be a weaker currency than outrage. Her story is therefore not only about her, but about the society that cheered as she wrote. To understand Rita Skeeter's awards is to confront the uncomfortable truth that magical journalism, like all forms of storytelling, often values sensation above reality. Number 24. Hidden jealousy toward Harry. Rita Skeeter was not simply a journalist in the wizarding world. She was a woman who thrived on scandal, exaggeration, and the creation of fear around those she targeted. Her most famous victim, of course, was Harry Potter himself. Over and over, Skeeter chose him as the centerpiece of her most sensational articles. While on the surface these articles looked like criticism, mocking his character, questioning his honesty, painting him as unstable, many scholars and fans of the Harry Potter stories have suggested that behind the barbed words and poison-tipped quill lay something far more personal. Rita, they argue, was deeply envious of Harry, envious of the fame he did not seek but carried like an unwanted burden, envious of the way the wizarding world looked at him not as a scandal but as a symbol of survival. The way Skeeter wrote about Harry is one of the clearest examples of how envy disguises itself as criticism. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Harry was chosen as an unexpected fourth champion in the Triwizard Tournament, Skeeter wasted no time painting him as a troubled young boy seeking attention. Her article in the Daily Prophet described Harry as a skinny, bespectacled boy who is no stranger to tragedy, and she claimed he was possibly unbalanced. Here was a boy who had never asked for fame, who longed only for an ordinary school year. And yet, Skeeter twisted his story into something grotesque. Instead of acknowledging his bravery or the sheer improbability of his life, she transformed him into the subject of ridicule. Such writing, when examined closely, reveals an edge of resentment. Why would a seasoned journalist with years of experience and access to the most powerful figures in the magical world dedicate so much ink to undermining a teenager unless she envied the attention he naturally commanded? It was not only the words she used, but the persistence of her focus that betrays her envy. Harry's every move became material for Skeeter's poisonous quill. She invented a romance between Harry and Hermione Granger. She hinted at rivalries with Ron Weasley, and she speculated endlessly about Harry's emotional instability. In one memorable passage, Skeeter described Hermione as a scarlet woman who toyed with both Victor Krum and Harry, implying that even Harry's friendships were nothing more than extensions of a scandalous life. The choice to focus on these elements, rather than the true story of a boy surviving unimaginable trials, points again to envy. Rita did not only want to shape public opinion, she wanted to reduce Harry's shining image into something mundane, even sordid, because she could not compete with the light he represented. The irony is striking. Harry was desperate to avoid the very spotlight Skeeter accused him of craving. He hated being recognized everywhere he went, hated the whispers and the stares, hated the way strangers felt entitled to his story. Rita, in contrast, thrived on recognition. She longed for readers to remember her name, to be eager for her next article. Yet in all her years of writing, she never achieved the level of admiration Harry achieved simply by being who he was. In that way, her pen was her weapon, but it was also her confession. Each stroke of her enchanted quill revealed her hunger to be what Harry had become by accident, the central figure in the magical world's imagination. A particularly telling moment came when Dumbledore himself commented on Skeeter's style. In Goblet of Fire, he quietly warned Harry and Hermione not to give Skeeter more information, noting how she sees things the rest of us don't. That description, while partly a reference to her animagus ability, can also be read as an acknowledgement of how she deliberately distorted reality. She saw not what was there, but what she wanted to be there. And what she wanted often was a version of Harry that she could drag down from the pedestal on which the wizarding world placed him. The instinct to tear down what one cannot reach is the essence of envy. Consider the way Skeeter framed Harry's experiences with Cedric Diggory. After Cedric's tragic death, Rita could have used her platform to honor the boy who had fallen. Instead, she centered Harry once again, writing in a tone that painted him as dramatic, unstable, and possibly delusional. Her choice showed that she was not really interested in truth or in memorializing Cedric. She was fixated on Harry's role in the story. To Rita, Harry was not just news, he was competition. He was someone whose every moment was significant, whose every glance was interpreted, and she could not stand the fact that her role in the wizarding world depended on attaching herself to his legend rather than building a legacy of her own. The envy becomes even clearer when we examine how Skeeter wrote about other figures compared to Harry. She treated Ludo Bagman, Barty Crouch, and even Cornelius Fudge with a kind of distant curiosity, reporting on their actions but not turning them into obsessions. With Harry, however, her words carried a personal edge, a sting that sounded less like journalism and more like a vendetta. That disproportionate attention highlights the truth. She was not simply doing her job. She was feeding a personal hunger, one born of jealousy toward a boy who had what she never could: authentic admiration. Hermione Granger herself recognized this truth and took it upon herself to expose Skeeter's weaknesses. When Hermione discovered that Skeeter was an unregistered animagus, she used the knowledge as leverage to silence her for a time. What is striking about this conflict is that it was not just about ethics or legal obligations, it was in many ways a battle between envy and integrity. Hermione stood for honesty, loyalty, and friendship, while Rita embodied ambition, manipulation, and the desperate attempt to control the narrative around Harry. Skeeter envied Harry, but she also envied the kind of loyalty he inspired in friends like Hermione, something Rita, for all her fame, could never claim. There is also a psychological dimension to Skeeter's envy. Harry was young, famous, and regarded as special, while Rita was middle-aged, notorious, and known primarily for the scandals she produced. The contrast between their reputations must have weighed on her. Imagine being a woman who dedicated her life to words, only to see a boy who had never written an article or spoken to the press become the center of every headline. That gap between effort and reward is precisely where envy thrives. It explains why Skeeter's words so often dripped with bitterness. She was, in essence, trying to remind the world not to love Harry so unconditionally because she could not understand how love without manipulation was even possible. One of the darkest elements of Skeeter's writing was her ability to influence others. During Harry's 4th year, her articles planted seeds of doubt among his peers. Suddenly, classmates whispered about his supposed arrogance, about his addiction to fame. Even Ron, Harry's closest friend, was affected for a time. This influence gave Skeeter temporary satisfaction, a sense of power. Yet even this power was hollow because it was built not on admiration but on the spreading of lies. The fleeting satisfaction of influence is always weaker than the lasting power of genuine respect. Harry, despite the lies, regained his place in the hearts of his friends and the wider wizarding world, while Rita's reputation never truly recovered. The envy Skeeter held for Harry did not only live in the pages of the Prophet, it shaped her entire career. Every major story of hers in the later books circled back to him, whether it was her intrusive biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, or her continued insinuations about Harry's supposed instability. Even when writing about others, she could not resist connecting them to Harry. The obsession showed that in her mind, he was the standard she had to measure herself against. But instead of lifting herself to meet that standard, she tried to drag him down to her level. That failure to rise above envy is one of Skeeter's defining traits. And yet, paradoxically, Rita's envy confirms Harry's significance. One does not envy the ordinary. One does not waste quills and parchment on those who do not matter. That Skeeter, a journalist hungry for relevance, chose Harry again and again reveals how brightly his story burned. He was a reminder to her that true influence does not need embellishment. His life, with all its pain and sacrifice, was enough to inspire generations. Her articles, however biting, were footnotes to his legend. The tragedy of Rita Skeeter's envy is that it left her blind to the possibility of using her talent for good. She was a gifted writer, clever and resourceful. She could have chronicled the rise of Voldemort with integrity, exposed corruption within the ministry, or preserved the memory of those who fought bravely against evil. Instead, she wasted her gift chasing scandals around a boy she could never overshadow. Her envy turned her ink sour, her quill into a tool of destruction rather than creation. Looking back, readers see clearly what Rita herself never admitted. Her greatest enemy was not Harry Potter, but her own envy. Each line she wrote about him was a confession of her frustration, each scandal a mirror reflecting her unfulfilled desire for admiration. And though her words sometimes shook Harry, they never broke him. In the end, her envy could not compete with the genuine love and respect Harry earned simply by being true to himself. That is the ultimate irony of Rita Skeeter's story, and the clearest proof that envy, no matter how loudly it shouts, is always powerless before the quiet strength of authenticity. Number 25. Obsession with love scandals. Of all the journalists moving through the wizarding world, none stirred emotions quite like Rita Skeeter. Her quills scratched across parchment with a hunger for sensation, and the fuel that kept her columns alive was not the politics of the ministry, nor the mysteries of dark magic, but the whisper of romance. Time and again, her most successful pieces leaned toward the same formula. Take a famous figure, drape them in rumors of love, and amplify the drama until even the dullest reader was compelled to buy the paper. The brilliance of Skeeter's craft lay in her ability to take fragments of truth, lace them with speculation, and then coat them with just enough scandal that they became irresistible to a public addicted to tales of passion and betrayal. One of her earliest masterpieces was the coverage of Harry Potter himself. During the Triwizard Tournament, when Harry was just 14, Skeeter twisted every glance, every smile, and every accidental touch into evidence of secret romances. Most infamous was her piece in the Daily Prophet, where she insinuated that Hermione Granger was toying with both Harry Potter and Victor Krum. In the fourth book, Rowling records her words with biting clarity. Miss Granger, a plain but ambitious girl, seems to have a taste for famous wizards. Her latest conquest is Victor Krum, Bulgarian seeker, who has invited her to visit him during the summer holidays. Rita's venom was not random, it was calculated. She knew perfectly well that teenage readers and their parents alike would devour any hint of love triangles involving the boy who lived. By pressing on that nerve, she created outrage, and outrage sold papers. What stands out in this episode is not just the cruelty toward Hermione, but the precision with which Skeeter chose her targets. Harry was a name guaranteed to sell, Victor Krum was a world-famous Quidditch star, and Hermione was painted as the ambitious girl caught in between. Each element fit together like the parts of a stage play. Rita had no need for truth, she needed characters. The supposed romance was her stage, and the wizarding public her eager audience. It is no coincidence that the Triwizard Tournament itself faded into the background of her writing compared to these emotional plots. For Skeeter, magic and danger were less profitable than love and jealousy. Her fixation on romantic scandal did not end with children. She turned her gaze to the giants of the wizarding world as well. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, she released a particularly sensational piece about Ruby as Hagrid and Madame Olympe Maxime. The article titled Dumbledore's Giant Mistake did not simply expose Hagrid's half-giant heritage, it embroidered it with a lurid subplot of romance. Skeeter suggested that Hagrid had an unnatural fondness for the statuesque Beauxbaton headmistress, implying that his clumsy attempts at courtship were something to be mocked by readers. Here again, love was not a tender subject, but a weapon. She twisted what could have been a gentle story of two lonely figures finding companionship into an object of ridicule for the entertainment of the masses. The reason Skeeter emphasized this connection was clear. A love story, even a distorted one, gave readers something human to latch onto. A tale about giants and bloodlines might interest a niche audience, but suggest that a half-giant is romantically linked with another half-giant, and suddenly the gossip spreads like fire. Readers imagined them at the Yule Ball, towering over the crowd, whispering in secret corners, and Skeeter ensured that those images were impossible to ignore. She did not invent the spark between Hagrid and Maxime, but she magnified it until it became spectacle. Perhaps the most controversial arena where Skeeter pursued her obsession with love was in her later years after the fall of Voldemort, when she wrote The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. In this biography, she did not hesitate to probe into the private life of the most revered wizard of the age. Her insinuations about Dumbledore's relationship with Gellert Grindelwald shocked readers not only for their boldness, but for their daring focus on intimacy. She wrote of close, possibly more than platonic, bonds, and though her wording left just enough ambiguity to avoid outright accusation, the implication was clear. Even in death, Dumbledore was not immune to Skeeter's hunger for sensational romances. The Master of Magic was reduced to a man whose greatness was supposedly entangled with forbidden love. This narrative choice reveals much about Skeeter's worldview. To her, power and intellect alone were not enough to fascinate readers. It was love, desire, and betrayal that made legends human. The wizarding public had already seen Dumbledore as a heroic figure. Rita reshaped him as a man capable of youthful passion and dangerous attachment, thereby stirring debates not about spells or politics, but about the private heart of their greatest leader. By tying Dumbledore to Grindelwald, she tapped into the timeless allure of a tragic romance. Two brilliant young men whose bond was shattered by ideology, ambition, and betrayal. The pattern across her career is too consistent to ignore. Whether she was writing about schoolchildren, professors, or legendary leaders, Skeeter returned again and again to the same strategy. She asked herself not what spell would interest her readers, but what heart would. In many ways, her journalism reflected the larger tendencies of human curiosity. History has proven that wars, politics, and laws may shape nations, but it is stories of love that linger in the imagination. Skeeter understood this truth with an instinct as sharp as her acid green quill. Her methods, however, reveal a darker side. To build her love-centered stories, Skeeter routinely invaded privacy. She relied on her ability to transform into a beetle as an unregistered animagus, crawling unseen into conversations to harvest secrets. This invasive technique was most often deployed in the service of finding romantic angles. It was not enough for her to report what happened at the Yule Ball. She had to hide in foliage to see who danced with whom, who leaned too close, who looked too long. She stalked her subjects like prey, not in pursuit of truth, but in search of a spark that could be twisted into scandalous romance. One cannot overlook the emotional damage caused by her focus. Hermione Granger, still a teenager, was subjected to humiliation on a national scale when Skeeter framed her as a manipulative girl leading on two famous wizards. The consequences were real. Hermione received hate mail, including letters filled with bubotuber pus. What for? Skeeter was a clever headline, became for a young girl a source of fear and distress. This reveals the danger of her obsession. By turning love into spectacle, Skeeter cared little for the humanity of her subjects. Romance was not about affection, but about selling newspapers. Yet the cruelty of her writing was inseparable from its effectiveness. Readers could not resist her columns. Mothers clucked disapprovingly. Teenagers argued in dormitories, and wizards at pubs debated the accuracy of her claims. She had given them something to feel about their heroes. This emotional connection, even if built on lies, was what made her so powerful. Her quill was sharper than a wand because it tapped into the most universal human weakness, curiosity about love. If we step back, Skeeter's fixation with romance also sheds light on the culture of the wizarding world itself. The fact that her articles were so eagerly consumed shows that wizard kind, despite their magical differences, were no less prone to gossip and voyeurism than Muggles. Readers wanted to imagine Hermione caught between two suitors, Hagrid bumbling through a courtship, or Dumbledore entwined in a tragic, youthful bond. It was not simply Skeeter manipulating them, it was society rewarding her for delivering what they secretly craved. Even when exposed and discredited, Rita never truly disappeared. In the later books, she remained an influential voice precisely because her brand of writing, sensational romances, was evergreen. While other journalists reported on ministry decrees and the spread of Death Eaters, Rita zeroed in on the love lives of those same figures. Readers might have feared Voldemort, but they still had time to wonder who Hermione was holding hands with at a ball. That is the paradox of human attention. Even in times of terror, love stories refuse to lose their grip. The legacy of Rita Skeeter is thus twofold. On one hand, she represents the worst of journalism, invasive, exploitative, and indifferent to truth. On the other, she highlights an enduring fact about human nature. What drew people to her writing was not her skill with facts, but her skill with feelings. She spun webs of affection, rivalry, and intimacy that ensnared readers' hearts more effectively than any spell. Whether it was the invented triangle of Harry, Hermione, and Krum, the exaggerated romance of Hagrid and Maxime, or the shocking insinuations about Dumbledore and Grindelwald, Skeeter's greatest weapon was always love. Her peculiar fixation reveals more than her character. It reveals the mirror she held up to her audience. Wizards and witches, for all their power, still longed to peek into the private worlds of others, still cared more for whispers of romance than for the mechanics of spellcraft. Skeeter merely fed them what they wanted. In doing so, she etched her name into history, not as a chronicler of truth, but as the queen of scandal, the woman who understood that nothing captivates the human mind more than the possibility of love, whether it is real, imagined, or entirely fabricated. Number 26. Suspected ties to the Death Eaters. Of all the controversial figures in the Harry Potter universe, few spark as much debate as Rita Skeeter. Known for her scandal-driven journalism and sharp, biting quill, Skeeter built her career on weaving sensational stories that blurred the line between fact and fiction. Yet beneath her flashy articles and relentless pursuit of headlines, a darker question lingers. Did she, at any point, lend her pen to the service of Voldemort's followers? While no direct evidence exists, the whispers within the wizarding community are persistent, and the circumstantial threads, when woven together, form a tapestry of suspicion that cannot be ignored. The foundation of these suspicions lies in the time when Voldemort first rose to power. Skeeter, already establishing herself as a rising star at the Daily Prophet, crafted stories that often aligned with the climate of fear spreading across Britain. Her words were not neutral, they carried undertones that subtly validated the Ministry's failures and, on occasion, cast doubt on those opposing Voldemort. Consider the way she consistently undermined Albus Dumbledore, portraying him not as a revered leader, but as a reckless eccentric. Even in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when Dumbledore stood as the primary force, warning the wizarding world of Voldemort's return, Skeeter's writing painted him as a manipulative figure trying to seize control. In hindsight, such portrayals mirrored the interests of the Death Eaters, who thrived when the public distrusted Dumbledore. One of the most striking examples lies in her coverage of Harry himself. During the Triwizard Tournament, Skeeter launched a campaign that portrayed Harry as unstable, fame-hungry, and dangerous. She described him as a boy disturbed and dangerous, possibly unstable, framing his experiences with Voldemort as delusions rather than warnings. This narrative, once printed, played directly into the Death Eaters' goals: to isolate Harry, discredit his testimony, and weaken the trust between him and the broader wizarding society. Was Skeeter merely hungry for headlines, or was there a deliberate motive behind crafting stories that so perfectly dismantled the credibility of Voldemort's greatest adversary? Skeeter's style also reveals much about her possible leanings. She was not simply careless with truth, she wielded misinformation as a weapon. Her enchanted quill exaggerated, twisted, and embroidered reality to produce maximum scandal. To some, this might seem like little more than the unscrupulous tactics of a tabloid writer. Yet others saw in it a more insidious design, the art of propaganda. Voldemort and his Death Eaters understood well that fear and lies could control minds just as effectively as the Dark Mark could command loyalty. Could Skeeter's pen, willingly or not, have become one of their tools? What strengthens these suspicions further is Skeeter's network of contacts. Journalists thrive on sources, and Skeeter was known for cultivating relationships in shady corners of the wizarding world. Her uncanny access to private information, most famously her exposé on Hagrid's giant heritage, suggests ties to informants willing to supply her with sensitive details. Who were these shadowy figures? Could some have been aligned with Death Eaters? After all, Skeeter did not hesitate to print stories that endangered reputations and lives. By revealing Hagrid's secret, she stoked anti-giant prejudice, a sentiment Voldemort himself relied upon to sow division in wizarding society. The overlap between her reporting and the Death Eaters' broader agenda becomes difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. Even her silence at certain key moments raises questions. During Voldemort's second rise, when the Order of the Phoenix risked everything to warn the wizarding public, Skeeter's voice was conspicuously absent. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, she had been silenced temporarily due to Hermione's blackmail, yet her return to print could have given her the chance to rally against Voldemort. Instead, she remained quiet until writing Harry's story under Hermione's terms, suggesting that she lacked the conviction to openly oppose the Dark Lord. Her absence from meaningful resistance further fed the perception that she was never on the side of those fighting Voldemort, but instead operated opportunistically, writing what best secured her own survival. It is important to remember the climate in which she thrived. Fear dominated the wizarding world, and Voldemort's supporters depended heavily on public confusion. Skeeter's stories often played into that confusion. By questioning Harry's sanity, by undermining Dumbledore, and by exposing secrets that sowed mistrust, she repeatedly destabilized those who stood against Voldemort. While she may not have sworn allegiance to the Death Eaters, her pen proved useful to them, whether she intended it or not. One might recall the line from Goblet of Fire: "If you want to know what a man's like, take a good look at how he treats his inferiors. Applying this wisdom to Skeeter, one sees her ruthless willingness to exploit the vulnerable, from Hagrid to Harry, which echoes the merciless philosophy of Voldemort himself. Yet rumours in the wizarding world went beyond indirect support. Some speculated that Skeeter had direct dealings with certain Death Eaters, particularly those with high social standing. Figures like Lucius Malfoy, with his wealth and influence, were known to maintain connections with the media. It was whispered in some circles that Malfoy financed favourable press coverage or used threats to manipulate the prophet's tone. Skeeter, ever drawn to the glamour of power, would have been a natural ally in this exchange. Though unproven, the possibility that her articles benefited from Malfoy's patronage only deepens the suspicion that her quill was, at times, dipped in the ink of Death Eater propaganda. The very fact that such allegations seem plausible reveals much about her reputation. Skeeter was not trusted. Even among her colleagues at the Prophet, she was seen as unscrupulous and unethical. Hermione herself described her as poison pen, a title that reflected both the content of her writing and the lingering sense of malice that surrounded her. A reputation so toxic naturally gave rise to darker theories, and while not all of them can be substantiated, they thrive because Skeeter made herself believable as an accomplice to those who thrived in secrecy and fear. Consider how Voldemort's ideology flourished, through silence, lies, and fear-mongering. Skeeter embodied all three in her career: her silence during key battles, her lies printed as fact, and her willingness to fan the flames of fear, all mirrored the methods of the Dark Lord. Even if she never bore the dark mark, her impact on public opinion resembled the work of those who did. She weakened the resolve of the masses, stripped credibility from those who opposed Voldemort, and allowed suspicion to corrode trust among allies. Her quill achieved what curses alone could not. It distorted truth at its core. One cannot ignore, too, the aftermath of her career. After Voldemort's fall, Skeeter continued her work with the same sensationalism, targeting figures like Harry and Dumbledore posthumously in her biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. In this book, she insinuated scandal, questioned motives, and presented selective truths in ways that once again served to undermine the legacy of those who fought Voldemort. If nothing else, this shows consistency. Skeeter was not a writer who aligned herself with truth or justice. She aligned herself with whatever story would sell, no matter how destructive. In a world still healing from Voldemort's terror, her words reopened wounds rather than offering clarity. Of course, defenders of Skeeter argue that she was simply a product of her profession. Journalists, they remind us, are not soldiers. Their role is not to fight battles, but to tell stories, however unflattering. To them, Skeeter's alignment with Death Eater interests was not proof of allegiance, but rather the natural byproduct of her quest for scandal. Yet this defense raises its own troubling questions. If a journalist knowingly writes in ways that empower the cruel and discredit the innocent, is she not complicit in their agenda? Skeeter's lack of integrity made her an unwitting ally at best, a conscious propagandist at worst. In the end, the suspicions surrounding Skeeter persist precisely because her work aligns too neatly with Voldemort's objectives. No sworn testimony, no dark mark, no secret meetings ever surfaced to prove her guilt. And yet when examining her stories, her timing, and her silence, one cannot help but see the shadow of Death Eater influence. Whether she courted them directly or merely mirrored their tactics for personal gain, Rita Skeeter ensured that her quill cut as sharply as any wand. For those who lived through the fear of Voldemort's rise, that was enough to raise the question: whose side was Rita Skeeter really on?